Okay, so here we go. Thank you guys and welcome. So today we're going to talk about feeding the endocannabinoid system. What do we eat? What do we eat? So if you've ever heard us talk, New Pharma or me, Chip, talk about the endocannabinoid system, you've heard me tie it back always to diet and nutrition. Well, today we're going to talk a little bit about diet and nutrition, and we're going to get a little bit more in detail about the things that we should eat and kind of things you potentially you might pay attention to in your diet, okay? And maybe why the situation is messed up, so we're in a bit of a messed up situation. We'll talk about that a little bit. So again, what is the promise of New Pharma? What is the promise of all this science that we've uncovered here at our company? Well, what we've discovered is right now we're all really malnourished. We're kind of driving hoopties, if you will. And this endocannabinoid system kind of regulates us in a way that we understand the computers in our vehicle are regulated. So it's a good analogy. But really, right now, we're all driving these hoopties, so we just don't understand what we need, how we need to nourish our body, and, how that all works, right? So, but as we begin to understand this endocannabinoid system, again, we're going to be able to target these areas of deficiency that we have just because of society or because of, where you live, but we'll be able to target in areas where we need supplementation and kind of diet boost. But anyway, we're going to get into that in a big way. But I need to, again, lay some groundwork on the endocannabinoid system. So what is it? Why is it important? All those things. So you're going to, if you've ever heard me talk again, you've heard the 1, 2, 3s. Chip always talks about his 1, 2, 3s on the endocannabinoid system. So bear with me for a second while I walk you through those, and then we'll get into kind of the meat of diet and why this is so important. So again, how do we regulate our bodies? Well, old thinking, really what I was taught in high school was that we regulate our bodies through hormones, right? So hormones up and down regulate organs, which is true, and kind of help us regulate organ function through our pituitary axis. But that's kind of old thinking. So again, now we know that the endocannabinoid system regulates the pituitary axis. So it sits in function above those hormones, and it's actually regulating that whole hormone situation. The other kind of problem with hormones is your immune system and really, how does that work with hormones? It doesn't. And kind of the intelligence and all that. And those were really never fully explained in that model. But, like science does, science is evolving all the time. To think that we have everything figured out is arrogant, frankly. So science should always evolve. And, what I discover standing on someone else's shoulders, someone should come along and stand on mine and build on, what I've developed. That's the way science works. But anyway, so how do we manage and regulate our bodies? Well, it looks like that we do this through something called the endocannabinoid system. And I say looks like because there's been, and we'll talk about this in more detail, lots of studies on the endocannabinoid, but there hasn't been that one that came along and said, oh, it absolutely is your master regulatory system. But we call it the master regulatory system, and most scientists and people who are world leaders, I would say, on the pharmacology of the system, all would agree that it's regulating every single function in the human body. So I don't think that that's a stretch anyway. But anyway, let's talk about this system, okay? So 3 points about the endocannabinoid system. And I think, if you kind of go with me on this 3-point journey, by the end of this, you're going to really understand how important this is to not only human function, but all function for the most part on the planet except insects. So point 1 about the endocannabinoid system is it's very, very, very old. So again, it's always important to see, when did we develop lungs? When did we develop breathe air? What, the whole develop from a chimp, when did we walk upright, right, is a big deal. Well, long, long, long before any of those things happened, we were a little guy at the bottom of the ocean called a sea squirt. And you can see him there at the bottom of the drawing, but there wasn't much to him, okay? But he did have an endocannabinoid system, and that's where we developed an endocannabinoid system. So evolutionarily, from this guy, insects went one way, and everything else on the planet went the other way. So everything else on the planet that's not an insect, for the most part, has an endocannabinoid system. So if you have a dog, it has an endocannabinoid system. Cat, bird, fish, reptile, all have endocannabinoid systems. And they look to do the same thing that it does in us, which is kind of cool. Probably the biggest discovery potentially of, my lifetime is this endocannabinoid system. That's how big of a deal it is. Okay, so point one, very old, very ancient. We share it with most life on the planet. Gosh, that should tell us it's important. Point two about it is it's looking to be our master regulatory system. Again, I say looking to be because of that big research study that's not there yet. But you can satisfy yourself to the amount of research that's out there. NIH.gov, National Institute of Health.gov is your friend. Endocannabinoid is your magic keyword, and go to it, and you'll find all the research you could possibly imagine, and it doesn't really matter where you go. Endocannabinoid and toe fungus, you're probably going to find a study out there that's been run. So anyway, but what do all those mean, and what do all these studies say if you read them? And I've read a lot of them. So point two about the endocannabinoid system is it's looking to be our master regulatory system. Well, what does that mean, really? Explain that one. Well, the way I like to explain this is we work kind of like our car. So we understand that our car has a computer, and that computer is always looking at every single system in our vehicle. So, engine, obviously, how much gas is in there, oil is in there, maybe valve pressure, windshield wiper fluid, air and tires, every single system in that vehicle is being looked at, and you've got a big dashboard, right, that reports to you, if there's issues. But again, that computer is watching every single system and trying to balance all of those systems to perfect function, perfect balance, something called perfect homeostasis, right? So we understand this about our car, and it's, looking at all this different stuff, and it's just trying to make our car as efficient as possible. Well, guess what? We work in a very similar way. So our hypothalamus hippocampus is our computer. Our endocannabinoid system is the sensor array and also the mechanism of action. So again, as our hypothalamus hippocampus is watching our body, it's using the endocannabinoid system to do it, kind of like electrical system, I guess, if you will. And then if it needs to do something. So again, oh, Chip, you need nutrients. I need to make you hungry. I'm going to cue the pituitary to release something called ghrelin that'll make you hungry. All that happens, hypothalamus hippocampus in endocannabinoid monitoring, in endocannabinoid action to make all that happen. You don't like what Chip is saying, you throw a rock at him, it hits him in the head, bam, he gets a bruise, right? So all of that, again, happens due to endocannabinoid action. So you have a pain trauma, you have a pain response, you have to inflame an area, you have to cue stem cells to repair, and then when it's done, you have to deflame the area. All that endocannabinoid response, but all that controlled and managed by hypothalamus hippocampus, okay? So endocannabinoid system is involved in every single regulatory process in our bodies. So again, if we're broken, and we don't break, we just kind of dysregulate. If we're dysregulated, if you have diabetes, is that a dysregulation? If you cannot mediate pain, is that a dysregulation? If you have cognitive breaks or depressed, is that a dysregulation? Yeah, you're not broken, you're just malnourished. And so once you understand this system and kind of how we work and how bad of a state we're in, frankly, it's kind of easy to fix things. And again, we're presenting resources to the endocannabinoid system. Your body is kind of doing the magic. But anyway, so point two about it is it's looking to be our master regulatory system. So it is involved in every single regulatory response in our bodies, and your dog's body, and your cat's body, and your fish's body, and your reptile's body. All right, so point three about it is, how does all this work? Well, how does it do all this stuff? Well, the endocannabinoid system is fueled and driven by natural resources, okay? So again, back to the car analogy. If you don't have oil, what happens? Your car will break. You'll get a big red warning light, which we'll talk about in a second. But again, your engine will dysregulate and will not function anymore. So again, that's a pretty severe thing. Again, without gas, your car will not run. Without, windshield wiper fluid, your function is diminished. Without air in your tires, you cannot go as fast as you normally would or be as efficient. as you normally would. So all of these things require resources. So the example that I use, I stutter. So if I get stuck, just virtually kick me a little bit, bam, then I'll just, I'll come unglued, just, just like that. But anyway, we all know kind of about dopamine and serotonin, right? So we know that dopamine and serotonin are the things that fuel our cognitive and fuel our kind of emotional response, all right? So how we respond emotionally, how we feel, and our cognition are tightly related to dopamine and serotonin. So the more we have, kind of the better we seem to do that. And we don't do this, we do tight little band of up and down. So give me some more dopamine and serotonin. I want a lot of that. Where does it come from? Where do they come from? So it's funny, I ask this question a lot, where do dopamine and serotonin come from? And it, most people don't know, which is fine, but it's kind of part of the problem. So dopamine and serotonin come from amino acids called L-tryptophan and L-tyrosine. But again, L-tryptophan and L-tyrosine come from omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids, okay? So pretty much every chemical mediator that you need, there's really not the study to validate this yet, but let's assume that pretty much every chemical mediator that you need to run your body can be broken down by omega-3, omega-6 fatty acids. But if you go look at dopamine and serotonin, the encyclopedia, so to speak, or Wikipedia is going to tell you that dopamine and serotonin come from L-tryptophan and L-tyrosine, which are amino acids. And we get L-tryptophan and L-tyrosine in a whole lot of things that we eat, like our meat, because they have a lot of omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids in them. But that's not that important. The point of the story is this. If I put you in a box and I didn't let you have any L-tryptophan or L-tyrosine, you wouldn't be able to make dopamine and serotonin. And it would be not very, if I scared you real quick, if you had a fight or flight, you would burn through all your dopamine and serotonin real fast and you couldn't make any more, right? So again, if I put you in an L-tryptophan and L-tyrosine box and I don't let you have any, in short order, you're a depressed Parkinson's patient. You can't make dopamine, you can't make serotonin, you can't run your cognitive, you can't run your happy sauce, you can't run your emotions. So point of the story is this. Again, we take these higher level molecules and break them down into chemical mediators that we need to run us. And in this example, L-tryptophan and L-tyrosine. But most of these things come from omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids. So just think about the resources that we need. I mean, do we need resources for our immune system? In order to deal with something like COVID-19, we do. Because again, your immune system is what responds to a virus, but behind your immune system, your endocannabinoid system is what drives your immune response. Without endocannabinoid resources, you don't have an immune response. You are very susceptible to bad things happening. Do we need resources for our cognition? Well, we just talked about two, dopamine and serotonin. Do we need resources for our energy, norepinephrine, how we, our metabolism basically is, our energy levels are run around this whole regulatory system. So do we need resources for our regulatory, our endocannabinoid? Absolutely. So endocannabinoid resources absolutely come from omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids. So again, all of this really cool master regulatory system that regulates everything about us is obviously run by the food that we eat. I mean, we don't think about things this way because we've been pharma biased and we just don't think this way. But again, isn't this logical? If you were a deer and you're out in the forest somewhere, you can't intervene in the system. You can't, smoke cannabis. You can't engineer a product, to affect your endocannabinoid system. You have to be able to respond naturally to basically your foodstuffs, right? So what's in my environment that I can eat, and I need to be able to have the proper enzyme expression to be able to break that stuff down into the chemical mediators that I need to run me. So, and if I don't have it, again, I'm going to have these big flashing warning lights. What happens if you have a trauma? So you get a big red flashing warning light, don't you? And it's in the form of a pain response. What happens if you can't heal that trauma in your body over time? Does that continue? My lower back will tell you it absolutely continues every evening, right? So I get a big red freaking warning flashing light on my dash panel. I need resources. I need resources. Regrettably, I can't get stem cells back there just yet, but we'll get there eventually. But again, your body's telling you something with these dashboard responses. Hungry is a dashboard response. Okay. But anyway, we're talking a lot about how this system works. Let's get into it a little bit more. So again, without dopamine and serotonin, we're kind of a mess, and that's a good example. But if you're eating omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids, which we're going to get into in a second, in balance, all of these things sort of flow into kind of a natural taxonomy. They break out and you build the right things and kind of do the right things with the mediators that you need. So, but anyway, the promise of the endocannabinoid system is right now we're all kind of driving this hoopty because we're all malnourished in this endocannabinoid system. We just don't understand it well enough. But as we begin to understand it, and as we begin to supplement for the resources that we're missing, and as we begin to really design our future foodstuffs to feed this system, who knows how long we're going to live, really? Again, with high function. One of the things that I did a long time ago is I went back and I looked at pre-Diluvian times. Did people really live that long? It turns out they did. Why? Isn't that cool? So again, what should we eat? So how do we kind of look at this situation maybe with new eyes? We're not going to talk food pyramid today, folks. Absolutely not. So what we're going to talk about is something called omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids. So omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids, you need fatty acids to run your body. And again, it's looking like these fatty acids, they're these big, long molecules, right? So it'd be a kind of a ring, and then it'll have this nice long tail. And what it's looking like is that these fatty acids are stored in you in things called triglycerides, right? So omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids are stored in triglycerides. And when your body needs energy, it's going to go to your triglyceride stores and grab those fatty acids. But what it's going to do is it's going to break down those long molecules into things like L-tryptophan and L-tyrosine that it can then break down into dopamine and serotonin. So we break down most of what we need to run us from fatty acids. Interestingly, it's looking like the two fatty acids that we need for our endocannabinoid system are omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids. These are the only two that are called essential fatty acids because we have to eat these from outside sources. Our bodies cannot make omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids. So isn't it kind of cool, intelligent design, if you will, that our little vehicles are regulated by something called an endocannabinoid system, and it looks like that's fueled by the only two fatty acids that we can't make in our vehicle. So I think that's really cool. I think that's really neat. But anyway, omega-3 and omega-6, so they're essential fatty acids. They're the only fatty acids that our bodies can't make. We can make most chemical mediators from these or from other things that are made from these. And it's appearing that they're very important to our function, but also the ratio of omega-3 to omega-6 fatty acids that we take in our diet is also really important, okay? And there's a lot to this. Again, but this is pretty substantiated at this point. If this were untrue, let's say, this theory would have broke down in a lot of different ways that it's not breaking down in. Okay, so what should we eat? Omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acid ratio. So I'm going to read you this. I'm sorry to have to read you something. I think it's good. This is actually a study done by a friend. So her name is Dr. Artemis Simopoulos, and I'm a crazy weird guy. I'll call anyone on the phone and talk to them, and she's kind of a crazy weird lady. She picked up the phone and talked to me, but I ended up having probably an hour conversation, one of our first conversations with her, and we talked about the endocannabinoid system and the crossover between omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids. Artemis is probably the world expert on omega-3, omega-6 fatty acids, and she, penned something called the Mediterranean diet back in the day. She's led really the charge on omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acid research. So I want to kind of give her props there. But anyway, what she found in this study is, and I'll just read it to you, recent studies in humans show that in addition to absolute amounts of omega-6 and omega-3 fatty acid intake, the omega-6 omega-3 ratio plays an important role in increasing the development of obesity via both AA-escanoid metabolites and hyperactivity of the cannabinoid system, which can be reversed with increased intake of EPA, I'll just say it that way, and DHA, because I never can get those right. So a balanced omega-6 omega-3 ratio is important for health and in the prevention and management of obesity. So what she's saying is, I can make you fat, obese, by increasing omega-6 fatty acids. And I can completely reverse that by increasing omega-3 fatty acids. So again, what is obesity? It's heavily related to inflammation. Inflammation is the leading cause of death in the United States. So again, and there's many, many studies here about omega-3, omega-6 ratio and balance. And in fact, Artemis has done several studies about kind of how you break and where along that dysregulation. So again, let's look at this omega-3, omega-6 fatty acid ratio. And they always express it omega-6, omega-3. I don't know why, but to me, it would be more sense to do it the other way, but whatever. So omega-6, omega-3, you'll see the dot in between. That's how science expresses it now. But again, science is indicating that we should, most of this science, frankly, comes from Dr. Simopoulos, but most science right now is indicating that we should be somewhere between a 1-to-1 and a 4-to-1 on our amount of omega-6 to omega-3. So again, we can have up to 4 times as many omega-6 fatty acids as omega-3s, but once we get beyond that, once we get to like 10-to-1, things go wrong. Our current ratio is 20-to-1 in our diet. At 20-to-1, there's all kinds of research to indicate that we just break in exactly the ways that we see our society breaking. So we can't mediate inflammation, we have heart attacks, we get autoimmunes, just everything that's happening, cancers, things like autism, things like Parkinson's. Again, those all happen. Any mammal, if you dysregulate them, 20-to-1, omega-6, omega-3, they're going to break. They're going to break. They're going to begin to be a hoopty, so to speak. And so again, the dysregulation data on omega-6, omega-3, so as you dysregulate, it looks a lot like the endocannabinoid system. So if I deny you resources in your endocannabinoid or I dysregulate your endocannabinoid, those two things look very similar in kind of the data. So how do we get more O3s in our diet? So back to this slide again, right now, our current ratio is 20-to-1 omega-6 to omega-3s. That's horrible. I mean, if you eat processed food and all that, that's where you're at. And guess what? You're going to have health consequences associated with that. You really are. And all of us do. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in detail here in a second. But how do we get more O3s, right? So, and this was a real question for me when I started researching this. It's like, wow, we need more O3s, but where do they come from? Where do they come from? So obviously fish, we hear about DHA and EPA coming from fish all the time. And that's, if you want to, you go out to the kind of internet, you say, oh, I want more omega-3 fatty acids. It's going to point you to fish oil. Okay, all right, that's fine. Are there other meats that provide, alpha linoleic acid that can be broken down into DHA and EPA? We'll talk about that in a second. But there's other sources of omega-3s. So there's fruit oils, right? So you can go to, cranberries or hemp seeds or chia seeds, and they all have a higher balance of omega-3 than omega-6, right? So they're a little higher omega-3 to omega-6. So they would offset, if you will, what's wrong. But again, these are kind of supplements, right? This doesn't naturally explain in kind of an intelligent design how this works. And if you really think about this, it would, my God, at least, I don't think would design a system where if you live more than 5 miles away from the ocean where you could catch fatty fish, that you're screwed, right? So I don't think God would design that system. Surely not, surely not. And again, it doesn't look like that's what is happening, okay? But again, there's just not a lot of information out here yet. So what should we eat? Again, grains. So we eat a lot of grains, right? So we eat a lot of wheat, we eat a lot of corn, we eat a lot of grains. And guess what? Our meat eats a lot of grains. So the whole argument really is meat sources are where we should get this omega-3, right? So if it's fish, it comes in the form of EPA and DHA. And if it's other forms of meat, beef, pork, chicken, again, we should benefit from that, but we don't right now, okay? So we don't, and part of the reason is because our meat is eating the same stuff that we're eating. Our meat is eating grains. And so look at this. Look at what happens to the omega-6, omega-3 ratio. Again, a grain-free diet results in about 5 to 1, okay? So 5 to 1, all right? Or 5.15 to 1. You add 50% grain to this cow or pig or chicken's diet, just 50% grain, and now it goes up to 10 to 1. You go to 100% grain, 14 to 1, and the stuff that you're buying in the store right now is 30 to 1. 30 to 1. So you want to know why we're 20 to 1, omega-6, omega-3? Well, part of it is our meat, frankly, is poisoning us. The stuff that we're buying at the store is no good. Now, why is this? Okay, well, let's talk about this real quick. We all understand, and again, this seems a little divergent, but I'll tie it back together, I promise. So we all know that if we rub something that we're allergic to, like poison ivy, on our skin, what happens? We inflame, right? We have an inflammatory event. The skin gets red, the skin gets puffy, and it's not a good situation. And again, could you absorb nutrients through that? No, you couldn't, right? So that would cause real problems if it happened inside of you. Like if you took that poison ivy and ate it, guess what? We do that all the time. We're eating poison ivy with almost everything that we eat. And again, I'm just illustrating that our food sources are such a problem, right? So if you look at what are the major food allergens right now, milk, eggs, fish, shellfish, tree nuts, peanuts, wheat, soybeans. I mean, they're in everything, everything, everything. The other thing that's in everything is something called corn syrup, okay? And a lot of the same stuff is in the stuff that our meat eats, right? So our cows and our pigs and our chickens are all being fed this to fatten them up, right? So they're provide more meat for us. They're worth more. But another thing that we eat a lot of, go to McDonald's sometime and look at on the back of every label, and you'll see something called corn syrup, high fructose corn syrup, okay? And it is, again, not good for us at all. It counteracts the positive effects of omega-3 fatty acids, okay? So not only are we eating way too many omega-6 fatty acids, we're eating things that counteract the good things of the omega-3s that we are eating. And so's our meat sources, okay? So what should we eat? Again, our omega-3 sources should be our meat. But our meat is eating this same processed diet that we do. So you can kind of look through these studies if you'd like and kind of get an appreciation that grain-fed diets that we, for the most part, are feeding our meat sources are really bad, and they're causing the same situation in our meat sources that we have in the human population. And, that's a dysregulation of about 20 to 1 omega-6 to omega-3. Sometimes it's way worse in meat. But the cool thing is we can turn our meat into a vitamin, and it's really easy to do. It's really easy to flip this situation in our meat, and I would assume it's also easy to flip this situation in us by simply introducing hemp. So either hemp pellets, as a plant, or hemp oil. But hemp absolutely turns around this situation in every single meat source, and probably us too. So again, I would recommend you guys all take some hemp oil on a daily basis. I would also recommend that you look for products that are in hemp oil not MCT oil. There's nothing really wrong with MCT oil, but there's nothing really great about MCT oil either. Again, hemp oil is something that will completely change your situation and turn you from omega-6 heavy to omega-3 heavy, or a more balanced situation. And that's exactly what we want to have happen. So hemp is very rich in something called alpha linoleic acid. And we break down alpha linoleic acid into DHA and EPA. And again, it's looking like that step of breaking down alpha linoleic acid into DHA and EPA is very important, because it's equated to how we do enzyme expression kind of down the road. And that's a little complicated, but basically how we respond to the food, and we're configurable to a point, but we're so far out of our configuration norm that we're broken right now. But once we get into back into about a 5-to-1 situation, omega-6 to omega-3, our bodies will respond and kind of do the right things and understand that situation versus a 1-to-1. But right now we can't. We're so out of whack, we couldn't begin to mediate that. So again, what should we eat? Well, let's go through this real quick, and then I'll talk about some supplements and things like that until we can kind of get this situation flipped around. So most diseases, first of all, can be tied to endocannabinoid dysregulations. You would be hard pressed to name me one that wasn't genetic, that wasn't some kind of regulatory situation at its heart. So again, most diseases, let's just be conservative and say 75% of diseases can be tied to a lack of endocannabinoid resources directly. That's a lot of them. That's a lot of, money and drugs and pharma and, keeping grandma alive longer or little Johnny alive longer, right? So it's a big deal. Similarly, many diseases can also be tied. It just depends on, take off those glasses and put on your omega-3, omega-6 acid glasses. And again, they can be tied to this disproportion or ratio of omega-6, omega-3. Omega-6s and 3s appear to be the precursors for the endocannabinoid system. And that makes a lot of sense, because again, it's your only two things your body can't make, and you're feeding your master regulatory system. So we, as humans and mammals, we're kind of only as good as what we eat. So if we eat bad fat, meaning if we eat meat sources that are as screwed up as we are, we're going to store that bad fat, and we're going to store those bad ratios, if you will. So when we store fat and triglycerides, it's garbage in, garbage out. So that it's only as good as what we're putting in our body to be used later. So that's something really important. So as we bring this omega-3, omega-6 ratio back in line, you may be eating in a perfect ratio, but it might take a while for your body to flip that in your triglycerides. So it's something to be aware of. In our meat sources right now, they're in the same processed food world that we are. So they're eating things that they're allergic to. Again, their omega-3, omega-6 is dysregulated due to the stuff that they're eating, grains and corn syrup, frankly. A healthy ratio of O6 to O3 is looking to be between 1-to-1 and 5-to-1. So that's where we want to kind of get to. And when we get there, again, our bodies have the ability to kind of respond to that and make changes to kind of increase our health if we're in that range. So, and then the cool thing is really just by feeding our meat sources hemp or hemp oil like CBD oil, boom, we change all this. So now they're a vitamin. Now we're eating good meat. And again, the same thing goes for us. If we ingest hemp oil or CBDs on a daily basis, we're changing our situation dramatically by doing that. Now, if you're in a situation, so this works, and again, this will work for anyone. As you begin to up your omega-3 intake, your health will improve, and it doesn't really matter what your situation is. We're all driving hoopties, and we should be driving these nice, things. So as we kind of trend toward those nice, new, cool cars, we'll see this more and more. But you can up your O3s, and that certainly, we all should be doing that right now. So upping our O3 intake, and you can do that with chia seeds, hemp seeds. You can do it with a hemp oil supplement. But until we kind of get our meat sources right, you're going to have to go out and find your own source of omega-3s. And you can do it with fish oil too, but I'd suggest some of these other sources because your body needs to do the work. again, it's always, they always talk about fish oil. Oh, it's easy, EPA, DHA, make it easy on your body. Well, don't make it easy on your body. Make your body work. Again, your body's a beautiful machine, you know, and it needs to kind of, it understands basically ratios of things by doing that work. Okay. So don't deny your body that understanding or that learning experience. So again, hemp oil, chia seed oil, you can definitely, olive oil is another good source of alpha linoleic acid, but you want to look for sources high in alpha linoleic acid. But ultimately, sorry, vegans, but we kind of should be getting these from our meat. Now, the other thing, again, cannabis is a way that you can kind of manipulate this situation as well. So, but biggest thing, hemp oil, chia seed oil, cranberry seed oil, find some fruit oils that are a little bit more O3 heavy than O6 heavy. Start changing those ratios inside of you, and I think you'll see your health improve right away. So thank you guys. If you have questions, anything like that, feel free to leave those in the thread, and we will